Hello, dear friends. This subject is not unrelated to my life because I have traveled many times for spiritual reasons. I couldn't help but be moved to write about this topic, which explains my delay. Opinion piece: Pilgrimage to the Fountains. The rise of spiritual tourism. It is the fastest growing tourism sector. Pilgrimages have always existed. External travel becomes internal travel. Lanza del Vasto was the greatest spiritual traveler. It is the art of traveling to find oneself. The Camino de Santiago recovered its level of affluence. Many come to meditate in Buddhist centers in Spain. Jerome Powell's speech reassures investors. Fed to withdraw monetary support by the end of the year. Oil posts biggest weekly gain in more than a year. Taliban have overrun the military site of Kabul airport. Taliban say 28 of their members killed in blasts. Turkey approves Taliban request to manage airport. Spain completes its evacuation from Kabul. At last 2 flights arrive. Europe prepares to take in hundreds of thousands of Afghan migrants. Greenland expedition discovers the world's northernmost island. Bolsonaro declares that everyone has the right to buy a rifle. Let's start. In quotes. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. The spiritual journey is individual, personal. It cannot be organized or regulated. It is not true that everyone must follow one path. Everyone has his own path, or her own path. Listen to your own truth, said Ram Dass. Richard Alpert, also known as Baba Ram Dass, was a contemporary spiritual teacher who wrote the 1971 book Be Here Now. Known for his association with Timothy Leary at Harvard University in the early 60s, both were fired from their professorships for experimenting with the effects of psychedelic substances on human beings. He was also known for his travels to India and his association with the Hindu guru named Karoli Baba. Spiritual tourism is booming because of the crisis and restrictions, as travelers seek emotional well-being battered by social trauma. There has always been religious tourism, and it has been called pilgrimage. A symptom of this new search for spirituality beyond traditional sand and beach tourism can be found in spiritual retreats, monasteries where to cohabit with recollection and silence. The goal is to find and explore yourself through a unique and unrepeatable experience in a place made to find inner peace. Lanza del Vasto. Pilgrimage to the Sources is the most important book by Lanza del Vasto, the greatest spiritual traveler I personally knew. Lanza del Vasto was an Italian philosopher, poet, artist, and non-violence activist. I was moved as soon as I saw him because of the great spiritual charisma he had. He was pure love. According to Lanza del Vasto, in quotes, the most effective action, the most significant testimony of non-violence is to live a life in which there is no violence, demonstrating that such a life is possible and even not more difficult than a life of profit, not more unpleasant than a life of pleasure, not less natural than an ordinary life. He died in Murcia, Spain on January 6, 1981, and founded the community of Large. In January 1981, Del Vasto was working to found a new community in Elche de la Sierra in the province of Albacete, when on January 5th he had a cerebral hemorrhage and was taken to the hospital of Ciudad Sanitaria Virgen de la Rixaca in Murcia. In the book, he relates his first days in India and the different steps he takes to get rid of this Western man, something that I also tried to do but didn't succeed. This is how he gets to know the objective of his trip, Mahatma Gandhi, who at that time was participating as an advisor to the Indian Parliament. His days with Gandhi reflected the close contact they had and the maturity of Lanza del Vasto's project of pilgrimage to the source of the Ganges, from where he returns after having experimented with almost all aspects of the ascetic life of the different castes and Hindu orders of renunciates. A high mountain wind blows through the pages of this troubled diary, a hymn to life and to the mystical knowledge of the universe, an existential revelation of Hindu hermetic keys with some of Walt Whitman's breath. Story of a Saint. First, in December 1936, Lanza traveled to India to join the movement for Indian independence, led by Gandhi. He had previously met him through the work of Romain Rolland. After living with Gandhi for 6 months, who gave him the nickname Shantidas, he undertook his pilgrimage to the source of the Ganges, a famous pilgrimage site, and after that trip he returned to Europe. Second, in 1938 he undertook one of his spiritual journeys to Palestine to see and visit the holy places. In the middle of a civil war, he went to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Between two lines of tanks, he returned to Paris at the same time that the Second World War started. He wrote some books of poetry, and in 1943 he published the story of his trip to India, Return to the Origins, which became a great publishing success. Third, in 1957, during the Algerian War, Lanza del Vasto started together with other well-known people a protest movement against torture. He faced it for 21 days. Fourth, in 1958, he demonstrated against the nuclear power plant in Kabul, France, which produced plutonium for nuclear weapons. Fifth, in 1963, Del Vasto fasted for 40 days in Rome during the Second Vatican Council, asking Pope John XXIII to take a stand against the war. Sixth, in 1965, he was at the National University of La Plata, Argentina, speaking to students about non-violence for weeks. Seventh, in 1972, Lanza supported the farmers of Larzac against the expansion of a military base by fasting for 15 days. 8. In 1974, a community of Lark settled in Larzac on a farm acquired by the army. 9. In 1976, he took part in protests against the construction of a nuclear reactor in France. Definition. Spiritual tourism is defined as the act of traveling domestically or abroad to visit spiritual sites such as mosques, churches, and temples of natural environments such as forests, oceans, lakes, spiritual gardens, wildlife parks, botanical gardens, caves, and rocks. This type of tourism is given for spiritual reasons and also to satisfy the need to thank the deity in which people believe or simply Mother Nature for everything obtained. These trips also seek forgiveness and inner peace. In 2007, spiritual tourism was considered by the World Tourism Organization as the fastest growing segment, as people increasingly seek to develop their own spirituality and discover the spirituality of others. In fact, spiritual tourism is based on a variety of motivation, ranging from traditional religious tourism to alternative medicine and forms of deep immersion in nature. Destinations can be countries, regions, cities, monasteries, temples, sacred forests. In this case, the most important places in spiritual tourism are Rishikesh, India, Himalayan Ananda, India, Machu Picchu, Peru, the pyramids of Giza, Egypt, Stonehenge, England, Shambhala Mountain Center, Colorado, Holy Island Project, Scotland, and Amansala Resort, Mexico. Spain. The main spiritual tourism in Spain is structured along the hundreds of kilometers between forests and paths that the Camino de Santiago traces. The International Pilgrim Welcome Center sealed the 70,000th Compostela document issued by the Church to pilgrims who have reached Santiago de Compostela in 2021. In the middle of the month, the pilgrimage has recovered its pre-crisis levels. Other spaces of spirituality of more secular techniques, such as meditation, also confirm the increase in demand. From the Sakya Buddhist Center, Alicante, specialized in meditation and Buddhist philosophy, they also confirm that the need to deal with discomfort has caused more people than usual to show interest. People are looking for alternatives, they say, from the Natural Park of Montgo, where the Buddhist Center is located. Religious tourism. Religious tourism, unlike all the other segments of the tourist market, is evidently one of those whose fundamental motivation is faith. Today, the only cities that have historically been the object of pilgrimage, such as Jerusalem, Mecca, or Rome, continue to be important points of reference in the sector. It is important to define religious tourism as spiritual tourism, but not all spiritual tourism can be defined as religious. A good example is the different activities such as pilgrimages, routes, meditations, or beliefs. The religious tourism sector is strongly established in Europe, where it is estimated that more than 50 million people engage in some time of religious tourism, and in Latin America, so that several tourist agencies have specialized in this sector. The type of travel in this sector usually corresponds to short days of 3 or 4 days, generally coinciding with the weekends or long weekends. There are several positions regarding what is included within this type of tourism, but in general it can be considered to include both visits to sanctuaries or sacred places and pilgrimages, as well as visits to saints' tombs, attendance and participation in religious celebrations. Slightly more controversial are canonizations, visits to religious leaders, Eucharistic congresses, holy years, etc. History. In classical Greece, great importance was given to leisure, and free time was devoted to culture, entertainment, sports, and religion. The most important trips were those made to attend the ancient Olympic Games in the city of Olympia, which were attended by thousands of people and where religion and sport were mixed, although there were also purely religious pilgrimages, such as those that went to the oracles of Delphi and Dodona. Already in the Middle Ages, both Christianity and Islam would extend religious tourism, more precisely pilgrimage, to a greater number of believers, and travel was greater. In the Islamic world, the Hajj, or cultural journey to Mecca, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, obliging all believers to make this pilgrimage at least once in a lifetime. Famous are the expeditions from Venice to the Holy Land and the pilgrimage along the Camino de Santiago, since 814, when the tomb of the saint was discovered, and the pilgrimages from all over Europe were continuous, creating maps, inns, and all kinds of services for workers. Finally, with the arrival of the Industrial Revolution, religious tourism would give rise to mass tourism as it is known today. Ecological tourism. Ecotourism, or nature tourism, is an approach to tourism activities in which observation of the natural environment is offered. It is an alternative style of tourism, or ecotourism, different from traditional or mass tourism. Although there are different interpretations, nature tourism is generally promoted as ecotourism, in which the welfare of local populations is also presumed to be paramount, and this presumption is reflected in the design of activities with criteria of sustainability and conservation. Due to its boom, ecotourism has become the fastest growing segment and the most dynamic sector of the global tourism market. This movement appeared at the end of the 80s and has already attracted enough international interest that the United Nations dedicated 2002 to ecotourism. Despite its short existence, ecotourism is seen by various conservation groups, international institutions, and governments as a viable alternative for sustainable development. There are countries such as Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, Kenya, Madagascar, Nepal, and Ecuador, with Galapagos Islands, where ecotourism produces a significant part of the foreign exchange income from the tourism sector, and even, in some cases, of the country's economy. Federal Reserve. Powell's speech reassures investors. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's wait-and-see approach in a much-anticipated speech on Friday gave investors and market participants some reassurance that the central bank's extraordinary efforts to shore up the economy were likely to support riskier assets for a while longer. The market does not succumb to panic and buys Powell's message. Investors have jumped in to buy sovereign bonds on the prospect that the rate hike is still some time away. Powell has become the piper. Fed points to end of the year for a start of withdrawal of monetary support. The Fed on Friday offered its clearest signal yet of the likely start of the withdrawal of massive monetary stimulus at the end of the year with the tapering of bond purchases, but warned that for a rate hike there is still a long way to go. He stressed that if the economy evolves as anticipated, it would be appropriate to begin reducing the pace of asset purchases this year. The Fed keeps interest rates artificially low through its monthly purchases. When the Fed begins to gradually reduce its monthly purchases, then there should be an increase in interest rates. The Fed noted that equities and real estate would collapse without its continued intervention. The Fed is currently between a rock and a hard place. It cannot raise rates to curb inflation, because if it does, it it will owe more interest to all bondholders on outstanding debt. If they leave rates where they are or lower them, inflation will continue to rise. Zimbabwe claims to have received $961 million according to Steve Biko. Simon Parkes claimed that the new financial system has begun that has nothing to do with the Great Duck site restart, but with the spiritual elements of the quantum financial system, QFS. Markets. S&P 500 Nasdaq hit record closing highs. Wall Street rallied Friday, pushing the S&P and Nasdaq to record closing highs for the fourth time this week, as Fed Chairman Jerome Powell's remarks at the Jackson Hole Symposium calmed fears about the tapering timetable and sent investors into the weekend in a buying mood. Oil posted biggest weekly gain in more than a year. Oil prices rose 2% on Friday, posting their biggest weekly gain in more than a year, as energy companies began shutting in production in the Gulf of Mexico ahead of a major hurricane expected to hit early next week. European banks are lagging on sustainability. European banks are proving slow to act on sustainability and have only a limited understanding of their exposure to the environmental, social, and governance-related risks. A report from the European Commission from asset manager BlackRock showed. DHL warns that the global supply chain disruptions will persist next year. In quotes, "We do not expect freight rates to stabilize in the short term," according to Carsten Michaelis, head of the ocean freight DHL Global Forwarding Asia Pacific. In quotes again, "The combination of a year of disruptions, container shortages, port congestion, and a shortage of vessels in the right positions is creating a situation where cargo demand far outstrips available capacity. World container rates are at record levels." Greenland expedition discovers world's northernmost island. Last month, scientists set foot on a small island off the coast of Greenland that they say is the world's northernmost point of land and was revealed by the movement of the ice floe. Afghanistan. Kabul amid chaos and flames. The attacks in Kabul show the degree of instability that Afghanistan is experiencing today. They also confirmed that the Taliban are far from exercising effective control over the territories they conquered. Moreover, the attack underlined the inability of the US to organize a dignified exit. US evacuates thousands more in Kabul, expects more violence after bombings. The US military continued to evacuate thousands of people from Kabul on Friday, where crowds of Afghan civilians, desperate to escape escalating violence, returned a day after two suicide bombings killed dozens, including US service members. Kabul airport massacre leaves at least 170 dead. The Islamic State jihadist group's attack at Kabul airport, where a crowd was trying to board one of the evacuation flights to flee the Taliban regime, killed at least 170 people, in addition to dozens of wounded who are still in hospitals in the Afghan capital. The Taliban have already entered Kabul airport, and US forces will evacuate the airport and withdraw tonight. The death toll in the attack on Kabul airport rises to 170. not including the 13 US soldiers, according to the New York Times. It's one of the deadliest in the city's story. Taliban fighters seized military site of Kabul airport with US weapons. With the deadline for US withdrawal from Afghanistan looming in just 4 days, Taliban fighters are moving to take full control of the airport, according to unconfirmed media reports. Turkey approves Taliban request to manage Kabul airport. Turkey approved the radical Taliban movement's request on the management of the Afghan capital's airport, Al Jazeera television channel reported. Taliban request US to keep embassy in Afghanistan. The Taliban have requested that the US maintain a diplomatic presence in Afghanistan beyond the August 31st withdrawal of US forces. The Biden administration is weighing the possibility. Taliban say 28 of their members killed in blasts, blame US for chaotic evacuation. The Taliban say at least 28 of their own members were killed in Thursday airport attacks. We have, in quotes, we have lost more people than the Americans, the Taliban official said Friday. The Taliban vowed to increase their security around the airport perimeter, amid reports that Daesh is preparing to mount more attacks. US uses 3 more military bases to host Afghans, extends cap to 50,000 refugees. The US is housing or is prepared to house Afghan nationals fleeing their country at 7 military bases in America. 4 bases had already been used to temporarily house refugees. Joint Base McGuire, Dix Lakehurst in New Jersey, Fort Lee in Virginia, Fort McCoy in Wisconsin, and Fort Bliss in Texas. Defense has authorized 3 other bases to accept refugees. They are Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, Fort Pickett in Virginia, and Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. Journalist calls for wiping an Afghan city off the face of the earth for every American killed in Kabul draws criticism. Todd Starnes, a well-known radio host, called for the destruction of an Afghan city for every American killed in Thursday Islamic State bombing at Hamid Karzai International Airport that killed 60 people, including 12 US soldiers. Such comments earned the journalist's harsh criticism on social networks, where many accused him of advocating crimes against humanity. Spain completes its evacuation from Kabul with the arrival of the last 2 flights to Madrid. The last 2 Spanish planes from Kabul landed at the Torrejón de Ardoz air base. Both flights were carrying the 81 Spaniards who remained in the Afghan capital. They are military, police and embassy staff, as well as the acting ambassador, Gabriel Ferran. Also on board were 4 Portuguese military personnel and 85 Afghan nationals. More than 1,700 of the people evacuated from Afghanistan have applied for asylum in Spain. A total of 1,717 of the people evacuated from Afghanistan in the last few weeks have applied for international protection in Spain. This is 83.7% of the 2,051 citizens who have arrived in the country in recent days. Europe. Last hours for European evacuations are now the way for diplomacy. Different European countries have closed or will do it during this Friday their operations of evacuations of nationals and Afghans who in the past were collaborators, but still remain in Afghanistan many people who want to leave the country, which opens the door to the path of diplomacy. Europe braces for tsunami of hundreds of thousands of Afghan migrants. The Taliban's conquest of Afghanistan is set to unleash an unprecedented wave of Afghan immigration to Europe, which is preparing for the arrival of hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions, of refugees and migrants from the war-torn country. America. Mexican army aims to stop all migration. The Mexican armed forces have carried out a series of operational activities on the southern border that have as their main objective to stall all migration, said General Luis Crescencio Sandoval, Secretary of National Defense, on Friday. Bolsonaro says everyone has the right to buy a rifle. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro indicated Friday that the entire population of his country should buy firearms because, in his opinion, quotes, armed people will never be enslaved. Hurricane Ida hits Cuba's Isle of Youth. Hurricane Ida hits Cuba's Isle of Youth on Friday, the National Hurricane Center said, and the U.S. Gulf Coast braced for a direct hit this weekend as the storm advances toward the region. Biden declares emergency ahead of Hurricane Ida's landfall in Louisiana. President Biden on Friday declared a state of emergency in Louisiana and ordered the Department of Homeland Security and Federal Emergency Management Agency to coordinate relief efforts there for possibly catastrophic damage. Mandatory evacuations have been underway in Louisiana since Friday as Hurricane Ida is expected to make landfall Sunday night along the Gulf Coast. 140 earthquakes in 12 hours. Brutal seismic swarm at Kilauea volcano. A swarm of more than 140 earthquakes in just 12 hours in the area of the Kilauea volcano on the island of Hawaii alarmed geologists this week, who feared an imminent eruption as a result of the seismic activity. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friend.